This is your last chance. After this, there is no turning back. You take the blue pill, the story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill, you stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes. Remember, all I'm offering is the truth, nothing more. Follow me.
Take off a mask when it stops being a mask, when it's as much a part of me as I am.
Since 1871, the United States President and the United States Congress has been playing politics under a different set of rules and policies. The American people do not know that there are two constitutions in the United States. The first penned by the leaders of the newly independent states of the United States in 1776. On July 4, 1776, the people claimed their independence from Britain and a constitutional republic was born. And for 95 years the United States people were free and independent. That freedom ended in 1871 when the original Constitution for the United States of America was changed to the Constitution of the United States of America. The Congress realized that the country was in dire financial straits, so they made a financial deal with international bankers, none other than at the time, the Rothschilds of London, thereby incurring a debt to said bankers. However, the international bankers were not about to lend the floundering nation any money without stipulations. So, they devised a way of taking back control of the United States, and thus, the Act of 1871 was passed. With no constitutional authority to do so, Congress created a separate form of government for the District of Columbia, also known as Washington, D.C. With the passage of the Act of 1871, a city-state, a state within a state, called the District of Columbia or Washington, D.C., located on 10 square miles of land in the heart of Virginia, was formed with its own flag and its own independent constitution, the United States' secret Second Constitution. The flag of Washington's District of Columbia has 3 red stars, each symbolizing a city-state within the 3-city empire. The 3-city empire consists of Washington, D.C., London, and Vatican City. London is the corporate center of the 3 city-states and controls the world economically. Washington's District of Columbia city-state is in charge of the military, and the Vatican controls it all under the guise of spiritual guidance. Although geographically separate, the city-states of London, the Vatican and the District of Columbia are one interlocking empire called Empire of the City. The Constitution for the District of Columbia operates under Vatican law by lex fori. The entire economic and judicial system of the corporate United States, and indeed most of modern world, operates under maritime admiralty law. The Admiralty law system, which presently dominates all nations of the world, is a system secretly set up to contradict libertarian constitutional common law, also known as law of the land. What is Admiralty? Commercial law or law of the sea. A corporation under International Maritime Admiralty Law, Uniform Commercial Code, based upon Vatican canon law and perfected by the Roman Empire. One should also note that Adam Weishaupt, the founder of the Bavarian Illuminati, was a professor of canon law and a Jesuit. The Admiralty law system, commercial law or law of the sea, was secretly set up by Rome through Scottish Rite Freemasonry and Papal, Admiral Pope-epic knighthoods. The Admiralty law system is a system designed to enforce a number of Rome's papal bulls, decrees of the Pope of Rome. England broke free from some of the Pope's temporal power, political, economic and worldly power. In 1215, when the Magna Carta, an English common law document, constitution, became the basis for law in England. This incident could also be considered as a minor Protestant Reformation, as according to author Eric John Phelps, the Roman Catholic priests who supported this fair and libertarian law document were defrocked and deemed apostate by Rome. This law document gave England the most liberty out of all nations on earth, because at this time, every nation on earth was submitted to the Pope and Rome. The monarchies over each nation were servants of the Pope, who simply enforced the Pope's worldwide temporal power. This is known as the Dark Ages. In the 1500s, during the beginning of the Protestant Reformation, where common people began reading the Bible for themselves, and realized the Pope was seeking to steal the office of God and Christ, many common citizens in Europe started breaking away from the temporal, political, economic and worldly, and spiritual, occult, power of the Pope. Rome started losing control of Europe and the revenue and tributes that went along with it. It was during this Reformation time that resulted in the Bible being printed for the common people. During the Dark Ages, reading of the Bible was forbidden by Rome, as it would have exposed the Vatican as a false satanic religion trying to steal the office of God. This Protestant Reformation peaked in 1648, when the modern era was declared, and many nations in Europe broke away from the Vatican, and actually had true liberty. This liberty consisted of spiritual liberty in having the true Bible in their own language, which made them realize that the Roman Catholic Church was a lie. With the spiritual liberty came their political, economic and worldly liberty as well. Many Protestant nations in Europe and in the United States implemented constitutional law based on the Magna Carta that nullified the Pope's power. During the early years of the United States, and during the true Protestant years in certain nations in Europe, many of these countries had true liberty and freedom. These countries for some years were free from the Roman Admiralty law system. After the Pope lost much of his power during the Protestant Reformation, the Jesuits, who were a revived form of the Templars and Spanish Illuminati, began using Scottish Rite Freemasonry and papal knighthoods to secretly install Admiralty law upon the nations of the world, regaining the Pope's temporal power. This is known as the Counter-Reformation, which also consisted of the Jesuits secretly using the above societies to infiltrate and subvert the Protestant churches. These two missions of the Jesuits related to regaining the spiritual and temporal power of the Pope. Unfortunately today, most nations are submitted to the Jesuit order and Pope through the Admiralty law system, secretly set up by the Jesuits through the above-mentioned societies. You may recognize the Jesuits' power of today by simply observing their movement, the movement known as Zionism. They have their own state, Israel, started by none other than the Rothschild family. The state's flag even bears the star present on not only the old Rothschild coat of arms, but it's also present on the modern coat of arms. Interestingly, both the star and the colors used, blue and white, are found on the Rothschild coat of arms. The helmets, among other meanings, also represent the three-city empire. If the symbology isn't enough a proof for you that the state of Israel is in reality the state of Rothschild, look no further than this document, known as the Balfour Declaration. Now back to the United States. When Congress passed the Act of 1871, it created a separate corporation known as the United States, in all caps, and corporate government for the District of Columbia. This treasonous act has unlawfully allowed a District of Columbia to operate as a corporation outside the original Constitution of the United States and in total disregard of the best interests of the American citizens. In fact, a U.S. citizen is considered a resident alien of the District of Columbia. However, under the law of the land, you are a citizen of state in which you were born. POTUS is the chief executive, president, of the Corporation of the United States, operating as any other CEO of the corporation, governs with a board of directors, cabinet officials, and managers, senators, Congress, Trump as others before him, is POTUS. operating as vassal king, taking orders once again from the City of London through the RIA, Royal Institute of International Affairs. The popularly termed Illuminati, founded by the Society of Jesuits, the largest Roman Catholic religious military order headed by the Black Pope, created the Royal Institute of International Affairs, RIIA, in 1919. The American equivalent to the RIA is the Council of Foreign Relations, CFR. And on a side note, the rising puppet political star Tulsi Gabbard is a member of the CFR. The RIA and CFR set up roundtable groups. What did the Act of 1871 achieve? The Act of 1871 put the United States back under British rule, which is under Vatican rule. We like to say Americans lost their independence in 1913, but in fact, the precise date the United States people lost their independence is 1871. The Constitution of the United States of America, in all caps, is the Constitution of the Incorporated United States of America, in all caps. It operates in an economic capacity and has been used to fool the people into thinking it governs the Republic. It does not. Capitalization is not insignificant when one is referring to a legal document. This seemingly minor alteration has had a major impact on every subsequent generation of Americans. What Congress did by passing the Act of 1871 was create an entirely new document, a constitution for the government of the District of Columbia, an incorporated government. Instead of having absolute and unalienable rights guaranteed under the organic constitution, we the people now have relative rights or privileges. One example is one's right to travel, which has now been transformed, under corporate government policy, into a privilege that requires citizens to be licensed, driver's licenses and passports. By passing the Act of 1871, Congress committed treason against the people who were sovereign under the grants and decrees of the Declaration of Independence and the Organic Constitution. The Act of 1871 became the foundation of all the treason since committed by government officials. As of 1871, the United States isn't a country, it's a corporation. In preparation for stealing America, the puppets of Britain's banking cabal had already created a second government, a shadow government designed to manage what the people believed was a constitutional republic, but what it really was an incorporated democratic United States. Democracy was a system loathed and downright hated by founding fathers of the United States. Together this chimera, this two-headed monster, disallowed the people all rights of sui juris. You, in your sovereignty. The USA is a crown colony. The US has always been and remains a British crown colony. King James I is not just famous for translating the Bible into the King James Version, but for signing the first Charter of Virginia in 1606, which granted America's British forefathers license to settle and colonize America. The charter guaranteed future kings, queens of England would have sovereign authority over all citizens and colonized land in America. After America declared independence from Great Britain, the Treaty of Paris, signed on September 3, 1783 was signed. That treaty identifies the King of England as Prince of US Prince George III, by the grace of God, King of Great Britain, France, and Ireland, Defender of the Faith, Duke of Brunswick and Lunenburg, Arch-Treasurer and Prince-Elector of the Holy Roman Empire etc., and of the United States of America. End quote. This completely contradicts the premise that America won the War of Independence 7 years prior. Article 5 of that treaty gave all British estates, rights and properties back to Britain. Quote, "It is agreed that Congress shall earnestly recommend it to the legislatures of the respective states to provide for the restitution of all estates, rights, and properties, which have been confiscated belonging to real British subjects, and also of the estates, rights, and properties of persons resident in districts in the possession on His Majesty's arms and who have not borne arms against the said United States." and that persons of any other description shall have free liberty to go to any part or parts of any of the 13 United States and therein to remain 12 months unmolested in their endeavors to obtain the restitution of such of their estates, rights, and properties as may have been confiscated, and that Congress shall also earnestly recommend to the several states a reconsideration and revision of all acts or laws regarding the premises, so as to render the said laws or acts perfectly consistent not only with justice and equity but with that spirit of conciliation which on the return of the blessings of peace should universally prevail. And that Congress shall also earnestly recommend to the several states that the estates, rights, and properties of such last-mentioned persons shall be restored to them, they refunding to any persons who may be now in possession the bona fide price, where any has been given, which such persons may have paid on purchasing any of the said lands, rights, or properties since the confiscation. And it is agreed that all persons who have any interest in confiscated lands, either by debts, marriage settlements, or otherwise, shall meet with no lawful impediment in the prosecution of their just rights." End quote. This was subversion carried out by the Jesuits, modern-day Zionists, placing America back under control of the Vatican via the British Crown. It didn't stop there. The elite's banking arm has tried and failed several times after 1873 to place America and its citizens under total financial control via a central bank. In fact, by the early 20th century the US had already implemented and removed a few central banking systems, which were swindled into place by the ruthless banking Jesuit elite. At this time, the dominant families in the banking and business world were J.D. Rockefeller, J.P. Morgan, Paul Warburg, Baron Rothschild. And in the early 1900s they sought to push once again legislation to create another central bank. However, they knew the government and public were very wary of such an institution. So they needed to create an incident to affect the public opinion. So J.P. Morgan, publicly considered a financial luminary at the time, exploited his mass influence by publishing rumors about a prominent bank in New York was insolvent or bankrupt. Morgan knew this would cause mass hysteria which would affect other banks as well. And it did. The public, in fear of losing their deposits, immediately began mass withdrawals. Consequently, the banks were forced to call in their loans, causing their recipients to sell their property, and thus the spiral of bankruptcies, repossessions and turmoil emerged. Unaware of the fraud, the panic of 1907 led to the congressional investigation headed by Senator Nelson Aldrich, who had intimate ties to the banking cartels and later became part of the Rockefeller family through marriage. The commission led by Aldrich recommended a central bank should be implemented so a panic like 1907 could never happen again. This was the spark that international bankers needed to initiate their plan. In 1910 a secret meeting was held at the J.P. Morgan's estate on Jekyll Island off the coast of Georgia. It was there that the central banking bill called the Federal Reserve Act was written. This legislation was written by bankers, not lawmakers. This meeting was so secretive, so concealed from government and public knowledge that 10 or so figures who intended disguised their names when en route to the island. After this bill was constructed, it was then handed over to their political frontman, Senator Nelson Aldrich, to push through Congress. And in 1913, with heavy political sponsorship by the bankers, Woodrow Wilson became president, having already agreed to sign the Federal Reserve Act in exchange for campaign support. And 2 days before Christmas, when most of Congress was at home with their families, the Federal Reserve Act was voted in and Wilson in turn made it law. Years later Woodrow Wilson wrote, in regret, quote, "Our great industrial nation is controlled by its system of credit. Our system of credit is privately concentrated. The growth of the nation, therefore, and all our activities are in the hands of a few men, who necessarily, by very reason of their own limitations, shall uncheck and destroy genuine economic freedom. We have come to be one of the worst ruled one of the most completely controlled and dominated governments in the civilized world, no government by free opinion, no longer a government by conviction and the vote of the majority, but a government by the opinion and the duress of small groups of dominant men." End quote. Congressman Louis McFadden also expressed the truth after the passage of the bill. Quote, "A world banking system was being set up here. A superstate controlled by international bankers, acting together to enslave the world for their own pleasure. The Fed has usurped the government." End quote. But the takeover didn't cease there. Unfortunately, this stage of the one world order wouldn't be complete until every man, woman and child was enslaved to the financial burden of debt incurred by the Federal Reserve, which was made possible by the already standing Admiralty Law. It wasn't until the removal of the gold standard, the standard that gave the Federal Reserve notes much of their supposed value, that would bring about the new backer or collateral, you and me. From 1921 to 1929, the Fed again increased the money supply, resulting once again in extensive loans to the public and banks. There was also a fairly new type of loan called the margin loan in the stock market. Very simply, the margin loan allowed an investor to put down only 10% of the stock's price, with the other 90% being loaned from the broker. In other words, a person could own a $1,000 worth of stock, with only $100 down. This method was very popular in the roaring 1920s, as everyone seemed to be making money in the market. However, there was a catch to this loan. It could be called in at any time and had to be paid within 24 hours. This is termed a margin call, and a typical result of a margin call was the selling of the stock purchased with the loan. So, a few months before October in 1929, J.D. Rockefeller, Bernard Baruch and other insiders quietly exited the market. And on October 24, 1929, the New York financiers who furnished the margin loans started calling them in masse. This sparked an instantaneous massive sell-off in the market for everyone who had to cover the margin loans. It then triggered a mass bank runs for the same reason, in turn collapsing over 16,000 banks, enabling the conspiring international bankers to not only buy up rival banks at a discount but to also buy up whole corporations at pennies on the dollar. It was the greatest robbery in American history. But that didn't stop there. Rather than expanding the money supply which were recovered from this economic collapse, the Fed actually contracted it, fueling one of the largest depressions in history. This happened by way of the bankers deciding to stop printing money based on the guise that US government didn't have enough gold to cover the creation of more notes. An event entirely orchestrated by them, just like the event that brought the Federal Reserve into existence in the first place. Once again outraged, Congressman Louis McFadden, a longtime opponent of the banking cartels, began bringing impeachment proceedings against the Federal Reserve Board, saying of the crash and depression, quote, "It was a carefully contrived occurrence. International bankers sought to bring about a condition of despair, so that they might emerge the rulers of us all." End quote. Not surprisingly, and after 2 previous assassination attempts, McFadden was poisoned at a banquet before he could push for the impeachment. Now, having reduced society to almost nothing, the Federal Reserve bankers decided that the gold standard should be removed, under the guise of lifting future restrictions on printing money without the government physically having the gold to cover it. In order to do this, they needed to acquire the remaining gold in the system. So, under the pretense of helping to end the Depression, came the 1933 gold seizure. Under the threat of imprisonment for 10 years, everyone in America was required to turn in all gold bullion to the Treasury, essentially robbing the public of what little wealth they had left. And at the end of 1933, the gold standard was abolished. If you look at a dollar bill from before 1933, it says it is redeemable in gold. With gold being removed as a main backer, they now required to more accurately track a hidden backer and collateral, you and me. This was achieved by none other than the Social Security Act. The elite only tell you the parts of their actions that seem to benefit you. They never disclose how it benefits them or their plans. The Social Security Act assigned you a number? Well, 2 numbers to be exact. On the back is your serial number. That's right, because you are a product. A maritime admiralty product. A product bought and sold by bankers. That number not only is your serial number, but it also routes to a particular account started and maintained by the Federal Reserve. On the front is a number that is your account number, where all that currency from those stock transactions are held. We once had a video, as did others, showing you how to prove the existence of not only this account, but by doing so, proving everything mentioned in this video. Unfortunately, that was abused by many and used illegally by many more in an effort to become rich. After over 1 million views, the video was taken down by YouTube. And the disinformation agents came roaring out of their blindfold societies to paint it all as a scam. Of course, their propaganda was echoed by their masters, whom also issued a statement proclaiming it was a scam. Their claims of scam were backed up by people who used the information illegally, for little more than profit and selfish agendas. The people arrested became the illegitimate examples of their claims. It's rather amazing how quickly individuals forget. People that state they love freedom and America, yet can't simply see what even the founding fathers said about these elite banking cabals. Same cabals that control the Federal Reserve today and the so-called money in your pocket. Again, quote, "I believe that banking institutions are more dangerous than standing armies. If the American people ever allow private banks to control the issue of currency, first by inflation, then by deflation, the banks and corporations that will grow up around them will deprive the people of their property until their children wake up homeless on the continent their fathers conquered." End quote. That was Thomas Jefferson. This is the nature of your government today. It's the real identity of who you are to that corporate government. You are simply a product born a slave under the persistent hallucination and illusion of freedom. The so-called rights you believe you have are mere privileges granted to you by a corporation under the British Crown, that is controlled by the Vatican. You are a de facto corporation yourself. It's the only way the corporate United States has any authority over you at all. Obviously this was all just the beginning. What's on the horizon is nothing short than a prison planet and many privileges being stripped away from events they will cause. 5G is the key that enables it all. Artificial intelligence, predictive policing, the monitoring of your very thoughts, enabling clandestine entities to carry out false flags by manipulating people's very brain functions, make them see or hear things that aren't really there, or anywhere at any time remotely, utilizing the millimeter waves 5G is based on. If you have a 5G signal, you're at risk, not only from the exposure of the frequencies of the millimeter wave alone, but all aforementioned risks made possible by it. CERN and quantum computers will usher in what these occultist psychopaths have been communicating with. You still believe it's all conspiracy? From John Dee to Aleister Crowley to Lovecraft to the Jet Propulsion Laboratory to NASA to quantum computers, where even Geordie Rose who told you straight out what they were doing. In our estimation, the machines being developed by companies like Boston Dynamics will one day house quantum central processing units, and housed inside will be what will be called artificial intelligence that is anything but artificial. In closing, and on a positive note, it is becoming increasingly apparent to many American citizens that government is no longer being conducted in accordance with the Constitution, or, within states, according to state constitutions. While most people have recognized for more than 150 years that the rich and powerful often corrupt individual officials, or exert undue influence to get legislation passed that favors their interests, most Americans still cling to the naive belief that such corruption is exceptional, and that most of the institutions of society, the courts, the press, and law enforcement agencies, still largely comply with the Constitution and the law in important matters. They expect that these corrupting forces are disunited and in competition with one another, so that they tend to balance one another. This cannot be further from the truth. Mounting evidence makes it clear that the situation is far, far worse than most people think, as we made it clear above. During the last several decades, the US Constitution has been effectively overthrown, and that it is now observed only as a facade to deceive and placate the masses. What has replaced it is what many call the shadow government, or deep state, which was created with the illegal passing of the Act of 1871. It still, for the most part, operates in secret, because its control is not seen by the majority of people. The exposure of this regime and its operations must now become a primary duty of all American nationals belonging to the true Republic States of Union. As well, it should be the duty of every national of every country around the world who believes in freedom and liberty, as this scam is global. So while most of you want to storm a secret base, out in the Nevada desert, as you can no doubt see, the real root of all the world's problems lie with the Vatican and its elite tentacles. It is and should be a primary location for any protest demanding freedom. The US flag itself, everyone calls the American flag, is in fact a flag of the corporate United States and has nothing to do with America at all. While the United States flag's colors and the meaning behind them is something seemingly unknown and speculated among many, the reason it's not known is simple. Each star represents one of the corporate states of the District of Columbia's Admiralty law. Each state has a state within a state. In example, California. There is California state and there is the state of California, where the latter is under Admiralty law and the District of Columbia. Each of the 50 stars on the United States flag is on a blue background. The blue represents water. Money is considered water in Admiralty law. It's why it's called current, sea, and just like water currents in a river, banks direct its flow. The United States military is simply in-house security for the corporation. It's why on their uniforms the United States flag is fringed in gold. It indicates Admiralty law is in effect. We wonder if our bravest had any idea? Interestingly, United States flags in every courtroom are also fringed in gold, further solidifying the plain hard truth, that no matter who you are, we have all been had. In fact, under 28 U.S. Code 3002 Section 15, it gives a definition for the words, United States. The very first definition provided is, quote, a federal corporation. The real American flag, the one that truly represents the America you thought you lived in, under the Constitution, is shown here. Now, you have a choice to make. You take the red pill, you drop your false realities and your name and put on the mask of your enemy and help yourself and the world wake up, or you take the blue pill, you go back to sleep, putting on the blindfold, voting and regurgitating political one-liners from propaganda political news to your friends, following and sifting through the droppings of a supposed insider clinging to a false hope that voting for yet another CEO of the corporation under the crown, controlled by the Vatican, will somehow save you. You have to let all these illusions go. It's why we have always said voting will never change anything. The choice is yours, and unfortunately, you will make one, as simply not doing anything is a choice. There's only one solution, and that is revolution. This can be done in peace, but it requires unification of all people under simple precepts of love, freedom and liberty. Where we go from there we leave to you, but knowledge is only power if used and used correctly out of love. All revolutions begin in the mind. The first thing you must believe is that you are free on the precepts that no one can give you such things. The second thing you must begin to believe is simply love. For yourself and others to the much of your capacity. When these two consume your being, you can then begin from the right footing. We are anonymous. We are legion. Expect us.